Welcome everyone to this webinar on the response of philanthropy to crises and disasters organised by Alliance. My name is Andrew Milne, if you don't know me already. I'm a freelance writer and researcher and the features editor of Alliance, and I'll also be moderating today's discussion. The discussion also raises the curtain on Alliance's December issue on the same topic, and we're fortunate today to have contributors to the issue among our panelists. Before we hear from our speakers, just let me say a brief word about the format for this event. We're going to run for the next hour. Each of the panelists will make a short presentation. Then we'll have a Q&A session, which we invite all of you to take part in. If you want to ask a question, we very much wish you would do, you can do so anytime by using the chat function, which I think is on the right-hand side of your screen. In my case, it's on the left, but there we go. So yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on this throughout the webinar and selecting questions to put to the panelists during the Q&A. It's very straightforward. I'm sure we're all familiar with how the chat function works. So just click on that and type your question. If and when you do ask a question, please tell us also who you are and where you're from. Obviously, time's limited. We've only got an hour, but we'll try and put as many as we can to our panel. Apologies in advance if that doesn't happen. We're also, let me just say that we're hoping for a smooth technical ride, obviously, but if you do lose connectivity at any point, probably the easiest fix is if you refresh your browser, which should bring you straight back into the room, but hopefully that won't occur. Okay, you can also join the conversation if you'd like on Twitter using the handle @AllianceMag and the hashtag #CrisisPhilanthropy. Our December issue launches on the 6th of December. So in advance of this, we'd like to offer everyone attending today a 50% discount on subscriptions to Alliance. This will give you the 4 print editions a year, as well as giving you access to the online content with news, opinions, op-eds and what have you. And also we will register for events like this one. If you want to take up the subscription, you can do so again using the chat and entering the code CRISIS50. That's crisis uppercase and 50, the numbers. Alternatively, if you just want to purchase this issue on Crisis as a single issue, you can do that as well. And there are links in the chat to do that for both the print and for the digital options. Okay, so on to today's debate. Crises happen with increasing frequency and severity, as we all know. It's becoming increasingly clear that one form of crisis can trigger or aggravate another. The Ukraine crisis and the cost of living crisis, climate change and flooding, conflict and migration, and of course, any form of natural disaster and humanitarian crises. Philanthropy is often an early responder. The first and urgent task, of course, is relief. But what can philanthropy do to build resilience against future shocks before and after crises? When the world's attention moves on, what can philanthropy do either to make sure that the sufferers are getting the help they need to rebuild their lives and their societies? Given the relationship between crises, it's more important for different types of funders to make common cause, or should they stick to their area of expertise? We're delighted to have with us on today's panel Patty McElreevy of the Centre for Disaster Philanthropy, who is joint guest editor of the special feature, Anamika de Jong of the IKEA Foundation, Nasser Ismail, an ICAP Aspen Fellow and Independent Consultative Advisor, and Kulia Miller of the Human Rights Funders Network. Before I hand over to them, I'd just like to involve everyone in a short poll. Again, if you look on your screen, you should see the following question appear. Let's hope it does. What should be the main role for philanthropy in crises? Should it be A, funding for emergency measures, B, support for reconstruction after the emergency, or C, support for local communities and organizations before and after the event to create strong local networks which can help withstand future shocks? Just take a few seconds to answer that. Okay, let's all look at the results. Well, we close the poll. An overwhelming majority say option C, support for local communities, organizations before and after the event. Okay, well, thanks for that. That's really just to engage your attention. Let's move on now, as time is always pressing. Let me bring in the first of our panelists. Let me welcome Anamika de Jong. Anamika is Head of Portfolio for Refugee Livelihoods for the IKEA Foundation, where she's responsible for a dedicated team that funds select partner organizations delivering on livelihood projects for refugees and other forcibly displaced communities, specifically addressing existing evidence gaps in such programs. She's got over 10 years experience in philanthropy and project management, and in her current role, she's successfully developed the Foundation's 21 to 25 strategic plan to invest in evidence generation on refugee livelihood programs, impacting opportunities for refugees to find socio-economic integration in new communities. This has resulted in a public commitment of 100 million euros in refugee programming over 5 years. Anamika, welcome. Tell us please about your work and what evidence gaps are you seeing?
Yeah, thanks very much, Andrew, and hi, everyone. Well, let me share a little bit about the foundation and then dive into some of the examples from our team. So just to confirm that we are, as IKEA Foundation, the philanthropic arm of Inca, so they are the biggest owners of the IKEA stores as a franchisee owner. And actually the origin of the company or of the foundation actually starts with the company, where out of more of a corporate social responsibility perspective, programs were already being funded that would prevent exploitation of children. So there's a lot of relationships with child rights organizations. And when the foundation took over about roughly now 13 years ago, we then, of course, shifted along with those programs, and in the early years continued to look for innovative and efficient approaches in that. But we did also shift at some point to focus more on parents or future parents and caregivers as sort of the I guess, if you will, as an entry point for programming for philanthropic investments. And also in trying to respond to the climate agenda, started to add climate adaptation programming as well as part of that. And we also wanted to do that because we realized that the two biggest threats to children growing up safely and healthily were both the rapid change in climate and also the fact that parents or their caregivers necessarily not always having the tools and access to provide in the best way possible for their family, but they are still obviously the next generations continue to be the actual, eventual benefactors of our work. In our current strategy, the current mandate that we run comes together under this climate or livelihood strategy or people and planet. You see us use it a little bit interchangeably, also because the company, IKEA, actually runs a people and planet positive sustainability strategy. So forgive me if I use both, but we run through a climate and livelihood strategy and actually try to address some of those threats, both for mitigation as well as through adaptation strategies. So through our climate mitigation, we see initiatives that we find that would support key countries and companies to make sure they have, of course, the skills and knowledge and plans to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. It's also very much about behavioral change among people. But that's also then complemented with a smaller number of large initiatives where we're trying to very rapidly reduce emissions in carbon by 2030. So this is about targeting larger industries producing carbon emission. Think about manufacturing and construction or agriculture, electricity. And keeping warm and as well as cool. So all of those industries as well. We also look at climate adaptation as well through investing in renewable energy for productive use. We're looking at regenerative agriculture, really looking to decoupling growth and human development from how or thinking about how we then make use of the resources available, as well as looking at opportunities to invest in understanding where, I guess, the future of work is and where the green economy allows for entrepreneurship and employment opportunities that way. And then from our team's perspective, it is very much an inclusion agenda. So we're also making sure that refugees and other people affected by forced displacement are very much part of those solutions and those financing streams coming into communities, which we know needs to be much more of. But it is very much about making sure that people currently not included are absolutely included into these strategies. The reason we focus on evidence generation in this particular team, which is actually a theme throughout the foundation, I should say, but we've also specifically focused on evidence generation, is because we did not necessarily yet have the wide enough evidence base for us to really think about the scaling. So we're currently putting our philanthropic funding behind the evidence generation that will try to answer questions around livelihood programming and the kinds of things that we are that we see have a good hypothesis to work, but of course increasingly with the understanding of how it links into the, I guess, in the nexus thinking, right? So where developmental approaches, the green economy, and these groups come together really well. And it's also very much about, in that agenda of learning or of evidence generation, to keep that space for learning and innovation as we go forward. A few thoughts, and then I'll pass it back to you, but there's generally in the response to crisis, and it's interesting to see the results also from the poll. Overwhelming majority, of course, for C. But we just a note on our emergency support, or the way that we have been engaging in crises so far. I mean, just to say, as a general frame, we approach all of our grant making from a multi-year perspective. But we have changed also how we support with short-term relief. So initially it was very ad hoc, also even doing in-kind donations, and that's changed as we learned that actually as a best practice in emergency funding, it's much better to do these unrestricted core support grants. But obviously they're still multi-year grants, so there's a quicker mechanism to releasing the funds to our select few emergency partners that way. But all the other themes I just very quickly walk through, I guess, but that all receive multi-year funding, and you see an attention as well in investing in prevention and mitigation, as well as adaptation, to make sure that we are contributing also to rebuilding and rehabilitation efforts. That way is very much part of where we're focusing on. And just to add a few thoughts about also why I think we've been engaged so far anyways. I mean, obviously as a private sector philanthropy, we're able to, it's an interesting space that philanthropy holds. It can absolutely fund things that others might find more difficult to fund, or where funding isn't enough. And I think because we've got both the climate and livelihood angles, or people and planet angles, we're able to really also help think through how to link some of those strategies and smarter ways of financing even much more so. And of course, we see the pressures, the increased pressures that communities of our investment and new communities are having because of the change in climate, and how that then is linked to conflict. It really has been something we look at when we're identifying and trying to fund some of those best place solutions to make sure we're helping to build resilience. I'll pause there and hand it back to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Annemieke. Just a point of clarification. Obviously, there's a big stress there on sort of the relationship of climate change and refugees, but presumably you look at all other categories of displaced persons, if you want to sort of call it that. So it's not just refugees created by the climate crisis, or refugees created by conflict, by humanitarian disasters, or what have you.
No, and thanks for asking that clarifying question. So we don't necessarily make a difference as such. We very much take a whole of society approach in the programs we do. We do, however, say when it comes to the evidence agenda, we want to particularly understand what kind of things work or do not work when you are trying to implement livelihood programming and strategies for refugees as such. Yeah.
Okay, just before I leave you, something else that's kind of going through my mind as well. Thoughts don't stay long, so I have to capitalize on them while they're there. Is that, there's a lot of stress in terms of refugees and integration into the new host community. People see it as a sort of almost a mitigation strategy, but are we focusing on the sort of negatives rather than the positives? Refugees obviously do bring a lot. Do we need a sort of change in narrative on that, do you think? We talk about some refugee livelihoods in new communities.
Oh, absolutely. And it's something that we've been definitely trying to show through our work, and exactly also why we've put such an emphasis on that evidence and learning agenda, because there is a lot that can be gained from actually being working through or working with refugee populations. It's an opportunity to actually think through, if there is humanitarian funding coming into a community, how do you then support that kind of, how do you support the sort of, if you will, larger market thinking that could benefit the host community much more so. And I would also want to stress that all of our programs anyways wouldn't, as you're just asking the question about, I guess, the target group, it will always include host population anyway. So again, that whole of society approach is extremely important, and we wouldn't want to do it any other way, because then exactly you're going to just feed into that more negative perception that people might have if you are receiving, or if you are thinking about funding programs for displaced or that will benefit displaced populations, that that you can't separate that out. And it is about integration and socioeconomic opportunities for everybody in that hosting community. So absolutely, doing a lot on that agenda. And that's also where our relationship with our IKEA counterpart comes in. Obviously, there's things that we do as a foundation, so through our grant making. What we conferences for X do is create jobs very directly, but the company does. And so through their Skills from Employment program, where they're opening up opportunities for people with a refugee background to engage on skills training, language training in the countries of operation, part of that is also feeding into making sure we're having much more positive stories and we're actually showing what really means when we're helping, when we're setting everything up to support integration of refugees, very much so.
Great, thanks, Annemieke. Thanks very much for that. I'm going to move on now to Patty McElreevy. Patty is President and CEO of the Centre for Disaster Philanthropy. It's the only full-time resource dedicated to helping donors maximise their impact through more intentional giving in response to sort of domestic and international disasters. Throughout her 25 years of experience in humanitarian relief and post-conflict development, she's focused on improving the effectiveness and impact of the aid sector. Before joining CDP in March 2020, Patty served as Vice President of the humanitarian team at Interaction. During that time, she directed the organization's efforts to assist the humanitarian community, including Interaction members, UN agencies, and the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, in addressing the needs of marginalized populations. She's an adjunct professor at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and an official member of the Forbes Nonprofit Council. Patty, welcome. Do tell us about your work.
Right. So, Andrew, thank you so much for having me here today. This is such an important topic and one that so many of us, including CDP, have explored, as it's critically important to draw attention to complex humanitarian emergencies, talk openly about how to address that gap between need and fundraising. And I'm truly honored to be speaking here alongside such distinguished expert panelists. Our expertise, which you highlighted a little bit already, is really about, bringing our expertise, our experience, our tangible results for communities, evolving CDP into a trusted resource for philanthropy on community-based approaches, on the importance of addressing, root causes and recovery, and looking at that longer need of communities. So, regarding crisis reaction resilience and what more philanthropy can do, our research shows donors continue to prefer to fund immediate relief. So despite, what that poll said, despite what everyone kind of knows in their heart, we still fund earmarking for short-term traditional programs. And this preference persists, even though we know that addressing root causes, mitigating hazards, preparing communities to weather the coming storms will be much better investments for humanity. It persists, even though we know that with climate change, disasters will be faster, they'll be more furious. The impact of disasters from natural hazards on communities, especially those already vulnerable due to marginalization, will be worse. And persists despite the fact that we know the pressures of climate change will likely result in additional complex emergencies, conflicts arising over decreased resources and increased pressures on economies. So that begs the question of all of us, and why does donor behavior not change? If we know all these things, why are we not changing? And by this, I mean not just the foundations, but also individuals, how we give. And there's a few reasons in our research. One is empathy, obviously a major emotional driver in how giving is done. So there's a lot of responsiveness to photos, to imagery, to the narrative that we tell. Additionally, we have, evidence that disaster giving happens due to personal proximity to the disaster. We all know that if something's close to your community or within your own country, you turn to it, you look to it, you try and help. Scale, there's obviously that's kind of, everyone knows that we had so much fundraising going on for the Boxing Day tsunami that NGOs were actually returning funds, right? So the scale was just seen as so massive. And media coverage. When there's a lot of attention on a place, the media can drive a lot of funding to those areas. So these are all understandable drivers, but they diminish the attention we need on the recovery needs of communities, especially across multiple crises. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how do we change when and how people give. And starting off, we must take the time to explain that while immediate response is critical, it's only the first stage of what is needed by communities in their recovery. For example, while a warm meal or a blanket might be everything in those first few hours, even those first few days, neither will address someone's displacement, nor will it educate their child, or will it help them with their health needs. And if we put ourselves in those individual shoes, we know that's what we really want. We want to have that longer term ability. Additionally, if we're attentive to our current ethos of listening to affected communities and centering their solutions, we must focus more on addressing the root causes of their vulnerability and how those connect to their recovery needs. Another challenge, especially for those working in complex humanitarian emergencies, is helping donors navigate the how of helping, be it for immediate relief or recovery. The best practice for giving during any disaster, including CHEs, is to recognize that a recovery mindset requires us to keep affected communities at the center of the solution, giving them the dignity of choice. Too many donors put ourselves at the center of our giving. We want to know what impact we had, and thus we push towards solutions that are quantifiable and immediate. When we're asking too much of our operational partners in this regard, we need to actually pause. We need to challenge ourselves. We need to question if we're working from a position of trust. Humanitarian emergencies are incredibly complex, not only in the understanding of the situation and needs, but in the response as well. And I think, and they're all very different from each other. Ukraine is different from Yemen, it's different from South Sudan, it's different from Mali, it's different from all these situations have complexities. They're also incredibly protracted, lasting for years. So how can philanthropy make a difference in these situations? Start from a position of understanding. Give to organizations you've researched and supported and given ways that allows them to be nimble and adaptive, such as flexible long-term funding. Give your trust to those with knowledge, expertise, and connections in the community. And remember that those already vulnerable, the inequities will be exacerbated. So we need to look at programming that goes beyond the event, beyond those immediate needs that we might identify. Programs that look at social justice issues, look at sustainable development needs. This doesn't mean everyone listening has to become an expert in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, in climate change and social justice or peace building. Instead, what's required is we break through our silos. We seek out collaborations. We explore collective advocacy, co-funding, co-implementation. Affected communities need us to be our best, to work smarter, and to do that together. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Patty. Just to kind of add a point to what you were saying about sort of the focus still being on kind of relief funding. I think CDP and Candid did a recent report that 51% of dollars go to response and relief efforts, 6% go to recovery and reconstruction, mm-hmm. 4% to support resilience, which kind of absolutely illustrates the point you were making there. It's so summing up. I mean, is it really? It's about kind of knowing what's needed when and finding that out from the people who are actually there at the sharp end.
I mean, if we're listening to communities, I mean, there's a few practices we have as donors, and by this I also mean the bilateral donors, not just philanthropy, but it's about really having, we want that immediate response. We want to know that what we're seeing on TV is being fixed, is being addressed. But what we forget is even what we're seeing on TV, it's not addressed within the time we're seeing it, right? So even for recovery phase, we're looking at just trying to change that truck and chuck mentality, which is, we bring in things, we hand them out, it's worked in the past, and being a little more nuanced to say, we don't know yet what this community may need. If you look at COVID, for example, Andrew, how that played out for all of us individuals around the world, even on your same block, same socioeconomic status, same experiences in many ways, you had a different need than your neighbor. And your neighbor across the street had a different need from the both of you. And so but if the one fix is this, I have a hammer and here's the nail, all that we need is to do PPE, all that we need to do is vaccines, we would have had a very different approach to the COVID over the last 2.5 years. But we didn't. We looked very much, CDP in particular, looked very much at what are the community needs. We funded things like childcare. We funded economic recovery for businesses. We funded helping, the industries, the frontline staff in terms of how they were prepared, how they were navigating being so exposed, how they were going to recover. It's digital divide issues, education, all these things. We funded because we knew that hammer nail approach is only good for those first couple of days. it's actually not what's going to help people recover their lives. It's not going to help them move forward. And I think the same happens in every disaster across the globe, no matter what it is. Even if it's very small scale, individuals have different needs. A tornado affects communities in different ways. One, it takes a roof off, another, it blows their car away, right? Those two people don't need the same solution. So if we listen to them and we look at those who are actually working within those communities, we will hear of those needs and we will address the solutions they've identified and giving them the dignity of choice in what they require. And so instead of giving, two new roofs to the two families, and one's like, well, I actually didn't need a roof, we give what they actually require. And that's what I think we need to do better as donors, is taking ourselves out of our expertise, knowing all, and instead using our expertise to help recognize that we need to listen better and follow their lead. And so that's a bit where we go at. And yes, of course, as you said, I mean, there's a webinar. I put it in the chat later today for anyone who's got a lot of time for webinars today. On actually, you can learn a lot more about our research, but you can also download the report and read more about what we see as the dearth of funding to recovery and much of it going to response.
Great, thanks, Betty. Thanks a lot. I'm going to turn now to Nasra Ismail. Nasra brings 15 years of international development experience with specialized support to grassroots movements, proximate leaders, and equitable partnerships. She is the recipient of the 2022 Global Leadership ICAP Aspen Fellowship and is currently advising global organizations to create transformational and systems level impact through shifting power and practices. Previously, she worked as Senior Director of Global Strategy at Giving Tuesday and Associate Director working across programs and operations at Co-Impact, focusing on organizational structure and team engagement efforts. Through both her personal and professional engagements, Nasra puts a premium on gender-inclusive program design and advancing women's representation and leadership. She continues to find core meaning in her work across development, humanitarian and philanthropic sectors, using her inclusive leadership style and bridge building skills to arrive at a sustainable and long-lasting change in some of the world's toughest places. Nasra, welcome. Obviously, you've got personal experience with crisis as well as professional. Tell us about your work at the moment and what it is you actually do when we talk about bridge building.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. And it's really great to be here with everyone, including this incredible set of panelists who I have a collegial relationship with and professional relationship with, and some even personal. And so I'm very appreciative, and I'm listening and I'm learning a lot from them. I've worked with Patty when I was in Somalia, and so just a great amount of respect for everything that she says. And I bet you we've got a lot of folks who say a lot of things, but she really lives up to them. So just kudos to her and her leadership. I've been in this world of global development, humanitarian in some instances, but also within philanthropy over the last few years, specifically during COVID. And I've learned a lot of things. And I think I will touch on a couple of things that both Annemiek and Patty have said, and some that probably most of you who are listening to us already know. My frames, my lens, my perspective are coming from a heavy international development experience. I've spent about 8 years with U.S. government. I've spent another couple of years in a different donor entity in a global north headquarter location. I spent about 5 years leading international NGOs, and then most recently spent some time working on the sidelines and supporting and being a coalition leader for movements and organizations that are a mixture of both public and private, but also global north and global south organizations. So I have a lot of perspectives that I think I'm incredibly grateful for, because I do believe it makes me not only a great leader, but a great community member to any initiative that I'm a part of. I say that because ultimately what has grounded my leadership, grounded my experience, is also I know what it's like to grow up within a crisis country. I was born, and immediately right after that, my country of birth in Somalia did break down. And so most of my early childhood memories are also from that. And I draw on that really as a way to repair and as a way to think about how I listen and how I show up for communities who are going through crisis today, when I'm a lot older, a lot more grateful for where I am in life, much better place than I was when I was younger. When I think about what are some unique opportunities that philanthropy in itself, in the way that it shows up in its name, the loving community, can show up for communities in crisis, I really think of 3 things. One is investing in government systems. The very thing I needed when I was really young, when my community was going through a political war, a civil war. Yes, was all the things Patty mentioned in terms of the need to be able to shelter myself, to survive, and to be protected. But we also hungered and needed peace building processes that helped anchor our government and to essentially ultimately put us toward a pathway to stability. So I think we really cannot just rely on the bilateral communities of international actors to support government systems. Philanthropy in the very nature of how it funds, a little bit more flexible, a little less unrestricted, a little bit more ambitious, I think it could do a lot for restoring and repairing government system, because those things are the very nature of what make that relationship between government and community and citizen work well. And they only work well when you can rely on a government that responds to you and a community that can hold that government accountable. The other areas I've seen, and I would bet, we really hope philanthropy can show up even more boldly, is investing in the leadership of local organizations. You saw the poll, you saw the number. We're seeing a lot of action and commitments towards supporting local philanthropy, local systems of support, local coalitions. We have got to also figure out and make space for the strengthening of leadership of local organizations. I say that because the very first people we went to when I was young, and the very first people that I'm sure my Ukrainian colleagues went to when they were going through what they're going through now, is those who are closest to us. We seek the help and the assistance of those closest to us. And we also build relationships on trusting, and there's a lot of credibility building that happens between those who are closest to us, because there's also legitimacy. I didn't think of IRC when I was going through what I was going through. I mean, of course, there was a lot of presence of UN institutions. UNICEF was there in Somalia to support my family, but I really do think the more we are going into different kind of crises, more modern crises, more complex crises, we're going to have to invest in the local architecture of local organizations, and particularly their leadership. The last thing I would say, and this is something I'm currently learning in my Aspen Fellowship training, is we've got to invest in the ecosystem and infrastructure of knowledge, of research, of innovation. Both Annemiek and Patty mentioned, there's a lot of evidence creation within our system. It helps us make better policies, more sharper policies that are appropriate to the context, as Patty said. Not everybody needs the same thing. And so wouldn't it be fantastic that for every community that goes through a particular crisis at a particular time, that data, that knowledge, that research and innovation can be kept in that community? We so often have, and I'm very grateful for research institutions and academia who are studying communities that are going through crisis, but don't necessarily find themselves embedded in it. And so I think it's much more meaningful for me when I see young researchers and academia and research institutions inside the communities that are going through what they're going through, because that data is going to be a lot more succinct, a lot more precise, and I would bet it's going to really tell us and tell that community what it needs to do in order to do better and to survive and to repair itself from the next crisis. I want to use the Ukrainian example as a great example of where I think the infrastructure of the international system came to basically pull a kind of funding I have never really seen. I worked in the humanitarian system, and we raised a lot of funding throughout the crises, both pre and post. But I really have to say, we haven't seen an example where there's the world's attention towards Ukraine enabled so many international actors to gain footing and to gain access. Somewhere in the research that I read over the last couple of years, it's been one where the local Ukrainian civil society suffered greatly in terms of not being able to access that funding and actually having to go through a number of steps to access it, because the international system of support gathered and was able to benefit from that kind of fundraising. And so it's not a way to critique the system just from that perspective, but it is a way to say we've got to do better about finding the alleyways and the pathways and the unique loopholes that we have to find so that communities on the ground get the most funding at the height of a crisis. I think one of the other things, and I'll close with this, that I wanted to identify has been, we talk a lot about supporting movements. We talk a lot about supporting people of color. We talk a lot about philanthropy doing better in terms of reparations. I really hope that in that recognition, we also have the space to see leadership completely be decentered in terms of just a Western, white, male shadow. We see a lot of folks of color coming into power. I've seen my colleagues, I've seen myself come into a kind of opportunity that we probably did not see, and I don't think we'll see pre-pandemic. I hope alongside that confidence to see more and more women of color empowered, more and more movements of the global south be empowered, that we also are able to balance our requirements and expectations accordingly. I have always said to my colleagues, and I say it with a smile, I'm not here to fix white supremacy, and I'm not here to fix your organization. What I am here to do is to figure out how we can get those community of support the right aid, and at the same time think about whether I'm, as a leader of an organization, am I just interested in my own scaling, or am I really interested in scaling the right solution? One of the great examples that I look to, and I hate to name a name, but also when we see a great example, we must name it. Malago Foundation is one of these organizations that had the luck of meeting, not the institution, not even their model, not even until maybe a few months ago, their leadership. I met that organization through its fellows. I met two fellows who I'm very proud of, who are leading organizations that are really doing incredible work, one in food systems and food security, the other in agriculture. And when I met them, I don't think I saw the embodiment as we often see in those sort of selected individuals and organizations who get support from Global North organizations. I didn't see that they were, full of sort of brands of international aid or any kind of we were supported, we're partners of this organization. They just presented their organizations and they were able to carry out the kind of solutions that I think are going to change the African continent when it comes to those two areas. I learned about Malago more from the fellows that come out of their fellowship than I did, let's say, by going to their website. That is really, really important because there's so much of the centering of the philanthropy and the philanthropists that happens in our sector. Really, we want to center the communities and the leadership that come out of it in a good way. So I just wanted to point them out because I'm a big fan of them, and I really hope I get to see more Malagos and less of some of the other organizations that we know who are branding themselves and who are taking a lot more space than I think necessary when we think about crisis. I have a few more comments to say, but let me stop here, Andrew, and see if you have any more questions. Otherwise, we can move on.
Great. Thanks, Nasra. That's great. So what I'm hearing a lot from all of you is sort of centering communities and encouraging community leadership. Let me just ask you, I talked about bridge building, your views on bridge building in the intro. What are you thinking about particularly there? Are you thinking about bridges between the sort of donor community and the local community? Is that the principal one you're thinking of in this case?
Yeah, no, you can take it in many ways, Andrew. For me, it's been bridge building across differences. We are so attuned in the global development world to working with people like us of the same background, of the same perhaps mentality, or even who come from the same institutions, academic or otherwise. And my bet has been the hardest coalitions, partnerships, collaborations have come from people and organizations who really have commonality in their differences. And not necessarily because they speak the same language or are from the same part of, the global North infrastructure, the architecture of global aid. I think we've got to appreciate and incentivize the kind of differences and bridge building that occurs between very different entities, but who come together with the commonality of at least solving the right crisis for the right community and involving them and really taking a very humble approach in their in how they show up. And so most of the work that I do now as a consultant is to really help organizations define, are you in this work for transactions, for projects, for impact, for just data and evidence generation, or are you really in it to take yourself out of it? And that involves a lot of transformative inner work and a lot of transformative bridge building to say, what does it look like when the work gets done? What does it look like for you as an organization? Are you just going to be around for forever, or are you going to really hand over? Are you in the business of transforming even yourself through this process of gift giving and supporting local actors? And so that's how I defined bridge building, and I'm sure there are others who would add to it, and even if not, probably challenge me. So I welcome both, but that's where I am currently in my thinking.
Great, thanks for that, Nasra. Let me move on and bring in somebody whose name I'm sure to mispronounce. Kulia Miller is Executive Director of the Human Rights Funders Network. Kulia, you can put me right on that when you speak. She's worked in philanthropy for 2 decades, advocated for more responsive human rights philanthropy. Her work has included leading Australia's groundbreaking LGBTI Global Development Partnership with USAID, helping establish UN Women's $65 million fund for gender equality, and advocating for a robust feminist funding system at AWID and Marrakesh. Kulia has a PhD in sociology and a BA in public policy and feminist studies. Kulia, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here. This is a tough act to follow, although I've been so struck listening to the other speakers that the need to fund in crisis aligns very much with what we in human rights funding have been advocating for decades. Human Rights Funders Network has been around for about 30 years, and we came out of this need to find ways to model and enact delivering resources directly to communities. And I just keep thinking in this call that we're all bridge builders. My role here within HRFN is to strengthen those models, strengthen the models that center communities, to deliver resources directly to those on the front lines, particularly those who are most affected in any setting, to think about long-term core support. And I love how Patty said it, the dignity of choice, to have trust in the organizations that know best their context, to move those resources where they're needed. And I'm thinking about how each of us here can build bridges from the models that exist into settings that have a lot of resources but might not have those connections. One of the things that's happened for us at HRFN is over the last year and a half, we've had a lot of our funders come to us and say, we need to collaborate more. We need a space to come together so that we can be more effective in crisis. And we had already started this learning journey. There are all these phrases. We have a community of practice and a learning journey, so forgive me if they feel tired, but for us, they're really new and needed, because what had happened is we saw Haiti, Myanmar, Afghanistan, and in all of these settings, we had funders who wanted to deliver resources, but were doing it in isolation, both from each other, but also from the larger scale infrastructure around humanitarian aid. So in the spirit of dropping links in chat, I'm going to share a little bit about the initial learning journey that we did that has sparked a lot of the work I'm going to describe here. So we came together, and it was already during this process that Russia invaded Ukraine. And what we saw is that coordination that happened amongst human rights and peace and security funders in Afghanistan led to better coordination in Ukraine. I would not say it's excellent. I would say we have a long way to go in how we prepare, but we are seeing that there's a greater effort amongst philanthropy to try and work outside of our own silos and outside of our own specific subsectors. So this is moving, but then I look at the numbers, and this is where I want us to be both optimistic and cautious. When we look at humanitarian aid overall, we're looking at over $30 billion roughly per year. CDP, so Center for Disaster Philanthropy, that Patty leads, just came out with this excellent report, and I encourage you to go to the webinar later on it, showing $121 billion in disaster-related philanthropy in 2020. Now, a lot of that was driven by COVID, so just to keep that number in context. But we're talking in the $30 to $100 billion in aid in these areas. At HRFN, we do analysis on human rights funding. So again, funding that is specifically dedicated to advancing human rights and very often uses the tactics we're talking about in this call. That totals just over $4 billion a year. That's all of it. But then if you boil that down even more to funding that reaches spaces where there's a crisis or emergency, it is a tiny fraction. So we did some recent analysis on funding for human rights defenders and found that in our last analysis, the last year, 2019, just $24 million reached human rights defenders. I don't have a perfect visual to show you right now, but you can picture just the scale of this resource, all this money being driven, especially in short-term ways in crisis. And then of that, very little has that human rights lens baked in that indicates that there will be the kinds of practices that we are all saying on this call are needed. For us, this has absolutely been shown in specific instances. So in the response to Ukraine, we very quickly looked at all of the resources and commitments that were coming out. There was such an outpouring. We have not seen that kind of philanthropic response at that scale ever. But of the money that was committed in the first month or so, only 2% of the grants and 5% of the grant dollars had any indication that they were human rights related. Whether they used the phrase human rights, whether they talked about reaching communities with a human rights framework, that's 5%. Now, I don't think all humanitarian money needs to be human rights money. And I don't think that everyone should be acting in the same way, but that scale is off. If what we need is trust, if what we need is to move money to those most affected and most vulnerable. So I just want to pause there and really give us that sense. There is an issue. There are models out there. There are people like those of us on this call who believe in bringing those models to spaces where the money sits, but we need to do much more of that bridge building, as Nazra said. I just today read this a critique of the humanitarian funding, and it's building on a report that talks about feminist approaches, and I will also drop that in the chat in a minute. But it made me think about how frustrating it can be for those people who are right there on the ground to see the resources and not be able to access them because people think they're not the ones who should hold those. And I'm thinking specifically about an instance in Ukraine. We spoke with a number of feminist and LGBTQI groups who were able to support women and LGBTQI communities during the war in a way that very few people could. And they could do it because they were organized, they had existing networks, they already had a feminist perspective for them, which meant that they were looking at all of these intersections. They were looking at how gender-based violence, sexual assault, COVID, all were compounded by the war. Not that these were separate things, but that they intersected. But they could not access aid money for the things they needed because of the way that it was allocated to governments and then reallocated. If they weren't in exactly the right form, they talked about how they couldn't get money that would, for instance, support people who were experiencing gender-based violence and they had effects of that. They could only get medicine or treatment if there was something directly related to a very specific list of illnesses that were ascribed by the aid agencies. This is a huge problem. We need to continue to push back and think about how we can deliver resources in ways that reach those on the front lines, and those models exist. That is, I will keep saying that. Those models are out there. It is not a mystery. But we are not yet building the kinds of connections. And I think Patty's point at the beginning about what it takes to build empathy, there's a communication strategy out there that we are trying to leverage, but they exist. It is right there, and the scale needs to shift. So for us at HRFN, there are a few things that we see as our role to do some of this important work and vital work, especially as climate crises are increasing, closing civic space, are making these reaching civil society even more challenging. So for us, there's a community building aspect, absolutely. That is intending now to build connection across the globe, so across folks working in different settings, across institutions, but especially across sectors. And this is where we've seen a huge gap, and I would say the onus is on us within the human rights funding world to start looking outside more effectively, using early warning systems, connecting with funders who are making grants at a scale we could not possibly make, but also seeing where we each fit in that ecosystem. Human rights funders have been trying to do long-term core support for a very long time, but we are also, because of that, often able to reach spaces that might not be something that could be funded immediately by, let's say, a government agency, but we can both do work together. So we have a community of practice that we've been developing. We have our upcoming conference, and if any of you are going to be there, you'll see that there are quite a few sessions around these intersections: climate crisis, racial justice, and closing civic space. we hope to see action and hope collaboration come out of that. And then next year, we'll have a salon series with monthly discussions, because what we have seen is that there is a real need for tactical discussion about how to deliver resources well in crisis. I will stop there. Thank you again so much for including us in this really, really important conversation.
Cool, yeah, thanks very much for that. It sounds like what you're talking about is largely a sort of almost like a problem of bureaucracy. The kind of mechanisms are there already, but they're not being well enough used. Is there something we can do about that? Do we need another coordinating mechanism over the top, or is that just sort of adding kind of fuel to the fire in a way?
You're touching on my academic heart, which is in my own academic research, what I look at is the way that development funding does or does not reach feminist movements. And one of the key things that I found is that there are two types of accountability. One is bureaucratic, so it's an internal form of accountability. So accountability to your institution. I need to fill out this results-based framework so it can be proven to this person, to that person, to our board. While important in some ways, that is in stark contrast to accountability to movements or external accountability. And what I found is that when you hire people who are from movements, who are from affected communities, when you hire leaders of color, when you hire people who have lived and grown up in these contexts, they understand differently, but more than that, the networks and the people to whom they feel accountable are not just the bureaucratic institution. And it really changes where there are moments where people push back and try to shift some of the mechanism. So I feel like there's hope in exactly what Nazra was sharing, building up and engaging leaders who are connected to the community. So there's hope there. I also, as any good academic, am extraordinarily skeptical about the power of changing bureaucratic institutions. So I think there are also ways that we need to look at going around the system, or in my case, I feel the term subversion very much defines how I consider my own career, and the importance of that to me is that there are these places we can tweak, and then there are also places we can't, and we can accept that and push and invest there if that's where the shift can happen.
Great, thank you. Just let me move very quickly to questions from the audience, because we're running fast out of time. I've got to run two together here. One's from someone called Kelly and the other's from Alex Farah. Kelly's question is, how do we influence donors to move away from crisis to crisis funding, where people give a lot at the beginning of a crisis, but then funding peters out, but yet the crisis runs on and on? Alex sort of builds on that and asking, how do you get philanthropists to focus on the chronic conditions before rather than the acute results? Anybody want to come on? Patty, can I turn to you on that, do you think, first?
Yeah, happy to. I commented back in the chat. I mean, I really think it's about courage. You know, for too long, we have operational agencies or those reliant on the funds, be it again from philanthropy or from bilateral donors, which again, philanthropy is not going to replace the incredible numbers that could come out of bilaterals in a much stronger way for this. And by this, I mean, but from governments, from USAID, from others, from the UK. We need to push back. We need to stop giving simple narratives. We need to stop, in some ways, using the simple narrative as a fundraising tactic. Here's this, you know, for a cup of coffee a day, you can feed this village. Well, no, you can't. So let's stop oversimplifying and undervaluing the expertise and the actual effort that goes into the work that we do. And two, let's just say, donors, this isn't enough. If you have to have that generosity in those early days, fine, but then give us the flexibility to use it later, to use it in a way we need to. And with media, the same. We need to stop media. A lot of people will push money into situations. NGOs and the UN will push money into situations because they are scared of being called out in the media of not doing enough. And we need to say, you want us to listen to communities, guess what? The community needs a little time. They literally have just lived through the beginning of this disaster. We need to work with them and work within their space. So I think, there's a lot for me. It's about courage. It's about boldness. It's about challenging. It's about saying it's not enough to talk about this anymore. We're going to change. And the way we're going to change is we're going to push against the others who have power on us. Because we can't represent those who are pushing and we're trying to give them the power if we actually can't use our own power to push those who have it to move forward along the same journey that we're on. And I think that's where we have to really use the power we have to make change, enforce the change in those that we have some ability to power with, and then release the power we have to those within the communities.
Can I add one thing to what Patty's saying, which is that COVID has made a huge impact in how money is moved and in how it has forced us to get past the illusion that we need to have X amount of due diligence or certain types of structures. And I think that we do have an opportunity right now, and Nazra, you also pointed to this, there's new leadership. People have been forced out of their preferred realities in how money is moved. And we have a huge opportunity right now, I think, to push. And I don't want to underestimate either the fact that with COVID, everyone was affected. And one thing that I am seeing is that people understand the anxiety and the cost and the very real impact of crisis in a way that they could not escape during COVID. And I think that is not the case. Not to say everyone was evenly impacted at all. I would never make that case. But we do have a moment right now where funders are vulnerable, also a little more emotionally vulnerable than they have tended to be, and have had to shift their funding models very quickly. And I think leveraging that is incredibly important, and that there's a lot of potential there.
Great, thank you very much. Sadly, we're running very, very quickly out of time, so I'd like to circle back to all the panelists now to ask them for a kind of key takeaway. What do you take away from today's discussion? Whether it's a sort of an insight you just had or something that really stands out for you. Nasra, could I come to you first on that, please?
Sure. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to everyone. Kalea, there's so much. I was just fisting right here in Columbus, in agreement with you. For me, look, we need as many folks, as many supporters, as many philanthropists in crisis as ever before. It's unfortunate the trends are ticking in the wrong way. And so I think one of the things I have to say is all are welcome in whatever way and capacity you want to support. It's not just about resources or the type of resources or the amount of resources. But and so my clarion call to everyone is come, respond, be responsive to communities as well, but please stick around for repair. Please stick around for repair. And the way you do that is through humility, through staying the course. It's not centering yourself, but being in community with people who are different from you, and having the wherewithal to be with people in whatever crisis they're in whatever way you want to show up, but be humble. Thank you.
Thanks, Nasra. And Amika, can I ask you, what's your overriding impression from today?
Yeah, thanks. It's been a joy to listen. And it's just one thought, anyways, coming up from Kalea's comments about COVID and rethinking, we're actually even talking that because of that situation we were all in to some extent, and again, not equal across, but I think for some of us in the office as well, we actually had a reset and you had a different work-life balance. And in fact, we found that we probably were more productive and actually did more as an organization than before. So that mental health aspect definitely also is something that came through. But I guess what I wanted to take away from today as well, and listening to a lot of the data points from our colleagues, I think what we can do, what I'm going to take away, is also thinking about not just how we share learning from the program at sort of the activity level, and so what are we learning from a livelihoods perspective, etc., but also the why we do what we do and the how we do what we do. I was referring to some of the examples that we have as an organization, and obviously we can't be everywhere with the finite resources, but there is a lot that we can go beyond that and sharing that learning more so with our fellow peer philanthropy peer groups as well. So that's definitely something I'll take away, and we'll aim to do a much better job of too. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for moderating.
Thanks, Annemieke. Patty, last thoughts from you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I just want to really echo what Nasser said. I mean, thank you to everyone who gives. It's going to need all of us. And I really want to thank everyone. And so in terms of a couple of key takeaways that I would, send people away with is, how do you manage all these crises? I see a lot of questions coming up. Develop a disaster giving strategy. Figure out in advance, what will you give to? How will you give sustainably? How will you go as local as you can? How does that fit within your mission? Maybe it will lean more towards supporting, what Kalia was speaking about. Maybe it will lean more towards what Nasser was speaking about, or what Annemieke is funding. But I mean, it will be there as you identify that strategy. 2, just really remember, affected communities' needs will continue to alter and vary from place to place, month to month, year to year. One size does not fit all. Really, look at how you can pull back on that. And 3, support organizations you trust. Do that research, come up with partnerships, whatever, create sustainable, flexible, multi-year grants that allow you to be a true partner to them as they partner with the communities they serve. And those would be my takeaways for the philanthropists on the call.
Right, thank you very much.
And thank you to my other.
Sorry, yeah, we really are out of time now, I'm sorry to say. But thanks to our panelists for those last reflections and for all their work actually today. I hope you've all enjoyed today's discussion. If you did find it helpful and engaging, don't forget that you can use the link in the chat to take advantage of the 50% discount for an Alliance subscription. And the code, once again, is Crisis50. Obviously, subscribe to Alliance also means that you always benefit from free access to our events. You can also buy a digital or print copy of the issue using the links provided, so you'll be the first to receive the new issue, which has a special feature on crisis reaction and resilience. And that's it really, just to say thanks again to everyone. Thanks to our wonderful panelists for the benefits of their experience and their wisdom. Thanks to the Alliance team, especially to Em McGoldrick, who's sort of pulled the switches and pressed the levers. And most of all, thanks to you for taking part. I'm sorry, I'm aware there were questions that people wanted to ask, but we really are out of time. Our event series will continue with a free live stream of Alliance's 2022 A Year in Philanthropy event, which we're hosting as an in-person event at the Olga Khan Centre in London on the 1st of December. Do register for our newsletter if you haven't already done so, and you'll get your invitation to that as well. Okay, once again, thanks to all involved. I'm sorry it's been so rushed at the end, but thanks for joining and goodbye.